Greetings and welcome back to Room 303. We are here now at the introduction of a set of series of comments that we will be making. We're going to call this series Chats with Emily. We're going to take a look at the 1,775 poems of Emily Dickinson, especially in the Johnson edition, as we'll talk about it in a moment. We're calling this Chats with Emily. I was finished with my epics introduction materials at learnstrong.net. We then turned to Emerson and to Thoreau, and someone said, well, are you going to do Whitman? And I said, you bet. So we did all of the poems of Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We call that Talks with Walt. And at some point halfway through, one of you guys said, well, once you get done with Walt, I think this was probably in jest, you said, are we going to do Emily next? And I went, wow, now there is a challenge, and we've decided that we are going to do that challenge, so let's do it. And of course, we know we're going to fail. I mean, it's just like we said at the beginning of our Talks with Walt project. Harold Bloom, in fact, the famous professor of literature at Yale, once even said that Emily frightened him because she's so difficult and yet so amazing at the same time. The great biographer that I'm going to recommend that you take a look at, Seawall, he said that Emily Dickinson defies labels, and I think there's a lot of truth to that as well. Now, we're going to remain undaunted because I love two word pictures now for this set of Chats with Emily, as we will call it. One is standing at the base of Fuji Mountain. Some of us have enjoyed hiking up that mountain. Go back to our Talks with Walt and Ended Day lecture if you're interested in more on that one. And when you're standing at the base and you can't even see the summit, it can just seem like unbelievable amounts of labor that you're about to enjoy. And certainly, no question, we all have that feeling as we are looking at this volume of 1,775 poems. But I like another word picture, and it's this one. I like the word picture of my grandchildren swinging at the park. They get out of the truck, they run towards the swings. We get in the swings to bump our heads against the clouds and sing fun songs. That's the playful spirit. And I'm hopeful that we will have that playful spirit as we come to our chats with Emily. I want us to imagine Emily, of course, later in her life, reclusive, increasingly more and more reclusive. We'll obviously talk about why as we get into these talks. But there she is sitting behind her door, maybe half open to hear clearly the voice. But there is a conversation to be had, and I'm certainly hopeful that that's what we will enjoy. Now, why this study? Well, we said it, to repeat what we said in our Talks with Walt. We are the stories that we tell and retell. We're also the stories we decide to accept or reject. I can't think of another poet in American tradition, other than maybe Walt Whitman, that deserves so much our attention in our time. And again, America is a collection of these stories, and Emily is certainly one of the most important voices in that collection. Now, let's review quickly our approach to each of these poems. As I said, we're going to be using Thomas H. Johnson's edition. There's debate about which one of the editions to use. We're going to be using Johnson. Some of you are familiar with Franklin. I'm hopeful that you'll get your own copy, and I'm hopeful that now we're ready to go to work to introduce you to our study. First of all, we're in 303, so we have to begin with our learning theory. That is to say, our desire to connect new information to old information in meaningful ways. Think of it this way. We started with our Homer and our Virgil. We come to our Shakespeare. By the way, Emily once said about Shakespeare, while Shakespeare remains, literature is firm. From Shakespeare, of course, to our Milton and our study of Paradise Lost. I'm hopeful that you have already exhausted that series of talks with Milton at learnstrong.net. And then from Milton to Keats, and from Keats to Emerson and Thoreau. Emily actually, seeming to draw on the spirit of Emerson and Thoreau, said, "Consider the lilies the only commandment I ever obeyed." I love that line. And then finally, from Emerson and Thoreau to Emily herself. That ability to connect will happen then through our annotative approach, answering three guiding questions. At level 1, what does the text say? At level 2, what's the text mean? At level 3, how can I relate to it in some way, i.e. learning? At level 1, of course, summarizing. At level 2A, we divide level 2 into two parts. 2A, themes, messages. This is going to be problematic for us right away when we pick up Emily's poetry. Often we're going to say, is she trying to say something, or is she trying to just give us an experience? It's going to be wonderful for us to debate it. At 2B, that's our rhetorical, our literary analysis, and we're going to have so much fun. Why does she use all these dashes? What's going on with the way in which she capitalizes words. She makes up words. So, for example, I will say that sometimes, well, Whitman and Emily are differenter in some way, and somebody will say, differenter is not a word. Of course, it is a word from my grandchildren, and it's a kind of thing that Emily Dickinson would do, which she just make up words. I love that about her. Finally, at 3A, we're going to try to relate what she is saying in her poetry to other texts that we already know. Now remember, our understanding of text is inclusive. Everything from what you've read to what you've watched to what you've listened to, obviously to what you've played if you're a gamer. And of course, we're going to try to relate poems from this volume back to other poems that we have messed with, and we're going to enjoy that. And then finally, and most importantly at 3B, we're going to try to relate this stuff to ourselves. We're going to ask if we can personally relate to it. And it's here that I got to say it out loud. We're not producing these series of conversations for the scholars. Just like I said about Whitman, the scholars play their role. That is not our job here. Our job here is to make this stuff accessible to you as students. And there will be groups of you all over the world who will decide, let's sit together and talk about Emily, and we'll come up with ideas about what's going on in these poems. And somewhere Emily will be sitting behind her half-open door, I'm thinking smiling. Of course, we're also always going to be focusing on our Big Five, as we call it in room 303. Emily once said that the mere sense of living is joy enough. And to me, that's the spirit that stands behind our Big Five. What does this text say about epistemology, ontology, psychology, sociology, and of course, theodicy itself? Let's go through them quickly. Epistemology, of course, is the study of knowledge. What can we know? Of course, some people say, I absolutely am certain about whatever. The only problem with that is, of course, sometimes people are absolutely certain, do some really terrible things in the name of their absolutism. Of course, Emily herself, very much influenced by a certain kind of puritanical understanding of theology from this perspective, and she rebelled often against it. Of course, the opposite of that, epistemologically, is the relativist position. There is no truth. There are no absolutes, which seems to posit a truth in itself, the performative contradiction. So we will look at epistemologically Emily the way we looked at Walt Whitman, that is to say, the fallibilist position. I think I'm right, but I could be wrong. It is fundamentally what the spirit of science should be. If it's not, then it's scientism. And I'm going to argue that Emily has this brilliant capacity to play the fallibilist position, and we're going to see it over and over again. Ontology, of course, is the flip side of this, the study of being. Emily once said, there is always one thing to be grateful for, oneself. And I love that. Of course, ontologically, Emily's very interested in the fact that, yes, she is a body, but she's also a mind. But she is as well capable of identifying the way in which that mind is at work. What are we going to call that? What, consciousness, spirit, soul, whatever we want to call it. This tripartite understanding of human ontology is going to be a central part of our study of the work. The next of our Big Five is psychology, the study of the individual mind. The word I is the most frequent and used word in all of her poetry. And I think it's fascinating as to why, because it's not always going to be just Emily, but rather personas that she will play. And yet, what are the motivations psychologically for the individual? What are the fears? What are the anxieties? And what is it that she's trying to understand about herself? The flip side, of course, in our Big Five of psychology is sociology, the study of the collective, and she's brilliant about this as well. For a woman who spends so much of her life, supposedly a recluse and not around people, she has this amazing capacity to see all of the sociological dimensions of human existence. And then finally, the Big Five, the question of theodicy, that is to say, why must there be terrible things that happen? Why must there be pain and death and suffering in the world? And ultimately, like Walt, Emily will come down to this notion that when bad things happen, we mustn't ask why did it happen to us, but rather, why did it happen for us? Now, there will be some recommendations that I'll make for you guys in terms of biographies, but for sure one of those will be Richard Sewell's biography, and called The Life of Emily Dickinson. He points out that the Big Five there for him are, she's always wanting to talk about death, love, poetry, nature, and eternity. And he says it, the whole truth about Emily Dickinson will elude us always. I love that quote because it gives us some hope that we don't have to answer all the questions when we pick up these poems. We're rather swinging at the park. But what we know about swinging at the park, of course, is that the van is always waiting. And as children, we were told that. You got to go to the van, honey. You can't swing at the park forever. I don't want to go to the van. No, you got to go to the van. And to that degree, the van's always waiting. And as we get ready to go to the van, because we haven't met any 200-year-old people, so we know we got to go to the van, yes? We want to enjoy our swinging. We want to enjoy our study here of these poems. Now, let's think about as well one other dimension, and much like our study of Walt Whitman, we've got our 5 P's, our 5 perspectives. By the way, to our knowledge, Emily never actually read Walt Whitman, which is kind of fascinating. She did say, apparently, quote, "I never read his book," that is to say, Leaves of Grass, "but I was told that he was disgraceful," end quote. It's a fascinating idea. Sewell will actually predict in his book from 1974 that within a decade, America's 2 seminal poets will be Walt Whitman and Emily Dickinson. And of course, he was proved very much right. What are our 5 perspectives on Emily? First of all, as person, she is a product of history, and her biography does matter. Emily is poet, she's experimental, she's an iconoclast. She said once that the noiseless noise in the orchard is what she tries to share with readers. Number 3, Emily is a pedagogue or teacher. She loved education. Her father loved education, and I think, much like Walt, that Emily was very much about trying to teach us and speak to us as a teacher at times. Not only those 3 P's, but as well the P of the politician. Emily's own father was engaged in the political dimension. She said it this way: "Good angels weep, bad ones sing songs." And so we're going to be playing the views of her politics as well. Finally, and for many readers, most importantly, Emily is philosopher, or priest, or theologian. She's always curious. Emily once said, "Let Emily sing for you because she cannot pray." I find that a fascinating line from a letter that she once wrote. Now, the biographies that I'll be drawing from are Wisher's biography, This Was a Poet, as I mentioned, Sewell's The Life of Emily Dickinson, as well as the biographies of Woolf and Farr and Herberger, as well as Gordon. I recommend that you get as much as you can of background information, because there's just so much that's going on in the life of Emily. Speaking of the life, let's do a real fast history. We're going to be talking Emily's biography in many of these poems, but let's go through it. It's not K-N-O-T easy, okay, to do this project. She's born 10 December 1830 in Amherst, Massachusetts. She will die 15 May 1886 at 55. She goes to Amherst Academy for 7 years, then to Mount Holyoke Female Seminary, not very long there. Then she's back home, and then she remains home for the rest of her life. Some will argue as a recluse. She is known for dressing in white, and we're going to talk about the Belle of Amherst and all of that as we get into these lectures, okay? She's rarely going to greet guests later in her life. She'll sit at the top of stairs, or as I said, behind half-open doors, or even sometimes closed doors. She only publishes, and this has been somewhat debated, actually, what she published, but we believe only about close to 10 poems and a letter in her lifetime. However, she wrote about 1,800 total poems. We're going to work with a Johnson edition of 1775, and then maybe at the end we'll throw the rest of them in as well in our conversation. After death, her first collection was in November of 1890. Thomas Wentworth Higginson and Mabel Looms Todd, both of them are very interesting people. Higginson once said, "I never was with anyone who drained my nerve power so much as Emily." We're going to find this to be the case, I think, in our study. And Mabel Loomis Todd is the brother of Emily. It's his lover, and there's a fascinating connection between those two as well. In 1955, the Johnson volume that we will be studying is going to be published, and the 1775 poems that we will be studying in that order. Her brother, I mentioned, William Austin, 1829 to 1895, the older brother. And then her sister, sometimes called Lavinia Norcross, 1833 to 1899. She's the younger sister. Now, there is an important relationship that I want you to jot down. Susan Gilbert, she's the sister-in-law, and there is some argument that there may be some very homoerotic kinds of connections that are happening there. We'll get into that conversation. In the summer of 1858, the real writing begins for Emily, and continues, of course, on through the rest of her life to 1865. She will collect 40 of these kind of collections of her poems that she begins to put together. Her most creative years are 1861 to 65. Think about that as it relates, of course, to the American Civil War. It's fascinating, right? In the early 1860s, she begins to withdraw from society. She lives at Homestead, her father's house, and she will stay there for the rest of her life. She maintained in many ways an amazing life of acquaintances. She just didn't do it face-to-face. She did it through letter writing and the like. Much of her letters tragically destroyed upon her death because she requested it. When she dies, 15th of May, 1886, of Bright's disease. For 2.5 years, she had horrific pain dealing with this. She leaves behind all these notebooks, up to 40 of them, locked in a chest, which is quite compelling when you think about that. Now, throughout our chats, we're going to pick up more of this info in this biography. Now, our approach will be to first of all say, we're going to use Emily as our inspiration here. She once said, "Experiment escorts us last," and I love that. This is going to be a very experimental approach to these poems. We're going to begin with a quick intro always. Then we're going to read the poem, and then we're going to annotate it using the 3 levels, the big 5 and the 5 P's as we've talked about. The goal, if I were to say it this way, is that you would get infected. Some of you have said this happened in your study with me and talks with Walt, where you read 1 or 2 of the poems with me and you were like, okay, fine. After Song of the Open Road, dude, I've got to go back. And I love the imagery. You'll remember it from Song of Myself, passage 46, as he's speaking. I know I have the best of time and space. It was never measured and never will be measured. I tramp a perpetual journey, come listen all. You'll remember that in that he challenges the student, the reader, to jump out into the midst of the sea. Drop that little piece of wood that you're holding on to. Laughingly dash with your hair. Go out in the scary places. We're about to go to some of those scary places, of course, to go have a bit of fun swimming, okay? I'm hopeful that study groups will get formed, Emily groups will get formed, that will allow for you to begin to share ideas. And always I love that you would share insights back with me. I'm going to enjoy swinging at the park. I hope that you will as well. I've got a large number of people, Denise Fletcher, the great American poet, is a number of others that are helping me as I am putting together these lectures, and for all of that help, I'm going to truly enjoy it. Well, let's think about some final thoughts. There are so many ways to approach Emily. One of my favorites is wordplay. In fact, she even said this, "My own words so chill and burn me." And often, a single word is going to hold an entire poem together, and I love that. For example, if you've got your volume, go to 2 of her most famous poems. Poem number 435, "Much Madness is Divine as Sense," and look at her use of the word dangerous. Or go to poem 328, "A Bird Came Down the Walk," and look at her use of the word raw. And to me, those are 2 key words in our study of Emily. She's dangerous. She's raw. And I love that about her because she's going to challenge us to be the same. So, as for our now last comments, our chats with Emily, we want to turn to the very first poem, "Awake Ye Muses 9." And we want to challenge ourselves to really enjoy this study. I've given a number of lectures at LearnStrong.net already on a certain number of poems of Emily, but I haven't set them in a full study, and that's what we will be doing together. And for that, I'm hopeful that you are as excited as I am. Let's go to work. Thank you.